Hey budget gardeners, Vita Loca here. Join me today as we winter sow some poppy seeds. So let's go. If you've been very successful with the winter sowing process, feel free to jump to the timestamp shown below. Winter sowing is the process of sowing seeds outdoors during the winter months. You can simply scatter the seeds out on the ground, or you can sow the seeds in some sort of a container or pot. When it comes to what kind of container or pot to use, there are so many different choices out there. The big thing is you want to make sure it's translucent or clear. I like to use milk jugs, but I know other people have used juice jugs, rotisserie chicken containers, totes. The possibilities are endless. The big thing is, no matter what container you choose, you want to make sure that it can hold at least 4 inches of soil in it. Your containers should have holes in the top to allow water or moisture to come in. The containers should also have holes in the bottom to allow for proper drainage of water. I like to use potting mix. You can use whatever works for you. The key is to make sure that it's well draining and also that it retains some moisture. You don't want to use a seed starting mix because it's too light, too fluffy, and it will dry out way too quickly. You also don't want to use garden soil because it's very heavy and it's too compacted, which makes it difficult for roots to grow in. There are a ton of benefits when it comes to winter sowing. It's very easy to do, it's cheap. It doesn't require any additional equipment. You don't need any grow lights. You don't need any room inside your house. Another benefit to the winter sowing process is that the seeds will get a natural cold stratification period. That's very important for certain seeds such as perennial seeds. And in the end, your seedlings will be stronger, they'll be healthier, and they'll already be hardened off. You don't need to do the whole hardening off process like you would have to do if you started your plants indoors. Now, there is a certain timeline that you want to follow when it comes to winter sowing. If you start your seeds too early, there is a chance that those seeds will germinate prematurely. And if you get a cold snap, some of those plants that germinate quickly can die. However, if you start your seeds too late, what will happen is certain seeds, like the ones I talked about earlier that need a certain period of cold stratification time, they might not get that full period of cold stratification that those seeds need. So timing is everything. Now, of course, when it comes to the timing, it's going to vary from location to location. A general guideline is you do your winter sowing sometime starting in the month of December, but you want to be done with it sometime about 2 to 3 weeks before your average last frost date. But I want to give you a more specific timeline that I'm going to be following and that you can follow as well. So about 5 to 6 months before your average last frost date, you want to be sowing seeds that are requiring a cold stratification period. And those are usually perennials that are hardy in your area where you live. About 3 to 4 months before your average last frost date, that's a great time to be starting cold hardy plants. Plants that can tolerate cold, but also plants that reseed very easily in your area. Approximately 1 to 2 months before your average last frost date is a good time to start plants that are not cold hardy, plants that do better in warmer temperatures. Now, keep in mind though that when those seeds germinate, if you are going to have a cold snap, if you're going to have some cold nights, cold days, you want to protect those seedlings. You may need to cover them during that time. You may need to bring in your containers just for a few nights during those cold snaps. Before we get into poppies, I want to mention a couple of other things. If you need more containers, especially milk, water, or juice jugs, reach out to some coffee shops. I've reached out to Starbucks and they've hooked me up with milk jugs in the past. Also, when it comes to wetting down your potting mix, you'll notice in my videos, I just wet the top layer of my potting mix. And that's because we get a lot of snow and rain during the winter months where I live. However, where you live, it might be drier. So you may need to pre-moisten your entire potting mix. And then finally, when it comes to the placement of your winter sown containers, keep in mind where you live, it might be very windy and you don't want those containers blowing around. So you may need to put them in a more protected area in terms of the wind, or you may need to corral them all near each other and put something around them. Also keep in mind your climate. You might live in a very hot area, so you might need to put your milk jugs in a little bit of a more protected, shady location. So first, let me share some fun facts that I found about poppies. In certain countries, poppies have become a symbol of remembrance for soldiers who died in wartime. Also, the opium narcotic drug mixture comes from the Papaver somniferum poppy species. And then finally, the poppy seed is less than a millimeter long. It takes about 3,300 poppy seeds to make up an entire gram. One thing I've learned about poppies through my own experience is they can be very tricky to grow in your garden. But once you have them established, they are a wonderful plant to have. The key is trying to get them to establish in your garden. And there are a few plants out there that what happens is because of their taproot, the minute you try to move them around or transplant them, you end up losing the plant. Poppy is one of those plants, and I think that's where a lot of us gardeners struggle. So my goal for this year is not only to be successful with the poppies in my own garden, but I want you to be successful as well. So I'm going to be sharing some tips with you that I'm going to be trying, and I'm hoping you try in your garden as well. Last year I had a lot of success winter sowing poppies in milk jugs. They all germinated, they came up, but the problem was I didn't have enough time to get them out in my landscape. They went ahead and they started blooming their little heads off. They looked so pretty. So I know that it's possible to get them to germinate. I know it's possible to get them to bloom. The key is to be able to move them out of your container when you're winter sowing them out into your landscape without disturbing the roots. And so keep that in mind as we continue on with learning how to winter sow poppies from seed. Poppies are hardy in USDA zones 2 through 11. There are so many different varieties out there, so depending on the variety, some of those poppies may be hardy in your zones while others may not be. There are some poppies that are native to certain areas. For example, the California poppy is native to certain areas within the United States. There are annual varieties of poppies and there are even perennial varieties, which makes the plant very cool. And then there are just so many different varieties of poppies, and I'll list some of the ones that I found that I've heard of before. Oriental, Flanders or Shirley, Opium, Iceland, Bloodroot, and California. Depending on the variety, some poppies will bloom in the springtime while other poppies will bloom in the summer months. Placement is key. Poppies love full sun, which means they need at least 6 hours of sun per day. And when it comes to their height, it varies between somewhere around 20 to 36 inches in height. Not all poppies make great cut flowers in case you want to use them in flower arrangements, but the two varieties that are great for cut flower arrangements would be the Icelandic or Oriental poppy. These plants attract pollinators such as bees and butterflies, and what's really nice is they're deer as well as rabbit resistant. Just like so many other plants in our garden, you don't want to be ingesting poppies because they can be toxic if ingested. You've probably heard about people taking their poppy seeds and just scattering them outside, and they basically germinate after you've done that. Well, poppy seeds do need light to germinate, and that's very important. So if you are going to sow your poppy seeds either outdoors just by scattering them or using the winter sowing method, or you want to start them indoors under some grow lights, just make sure that you're not covering them too much with soil or potting mix. You want to press the seeds into the surface, and if you are going to cover them, just cover them barely, like 1/8 of an inch, with potting mix or with vermiculite. Poppy seeds need what's called a cold stratification period, and the winter sowing process will definitely take care of that. However, if you want to cold stratify them indoors, you can do that by putting the seeds in your fridge for 3 to 7 days or in your freezer for 1 to 2 days. Some plants need bottom heat or a heat mat. You don't want to do that with poppies because poppies love cooler weather. And I mentioned earlier that one of the best ways to get poppies to grow in your garden is just by scattering the seeds in a flower bed where you want those poppies to grow. Absolutely, that is the best way to do it because then you're not disturbing the roots. But I don't know about you, I don't always know exactly where I want to put my poppy plants, which is why I opt to do the winter sowing method. I want to do it in a more controlled fashion so I can take my plants and place them where I want to in my garden. However, if you do want to scatter them out in your yard, you can do that in the fall months or even in the winter months when there's snow in the ground. But just make sure that you remember where you scattered those seeds And when the poppy seeds are germinating in the spring, you don't want to confuse them for weeds. You want to remember where you place those poppy seeds because they will come up. You just want to give them time. However, I will say if you're going to scatter them in your landscape, you don't want to scatter them where it's a heavily mulched area. You want to make sure you pull back that mulch. The seeds are tiny, so when I winter sow them pretty heavily in the milk jug. However, I like to use what's called the hunk of seedling or HOS method. And what that means is taking a big chunk of the seedlings that are coming up and then planting them out in the landscape. Now, definitely you will have some seedlings that won't make it. They will die. But the goal is to get at least a few plants in each hunk of seedlings that you're collecting to survive. And I really recommend that method, especially when you're winter sowing your poppy seeds. And if you're going to start your poppies indoors under grow lights, you can use the same method where you're sowing the seeds heavily in some sort of a container. And when it comes time to bringing those plants outdoors, I would also advise that you use the hunk of seedling method and try not to disturb the roots overall of your plants. What I'm going to do next is I'm going to show you all of the poppy seed packets that I have. Some are newer than others, and my goal is I will be planting 1 milk jug of each of these kinds of poppy seeds. I don't plan to use up every single seed in all these packets, but I do want to have a good variety of poppies growing in my garden for next year. There's Lauren's Grape. It's a breadseed poppy. I have 2 packets of that. Peony Double Blend breadseed poppy. Angel's Choir Shirley's poppies. My mother-in-law passed away in 2018, and she had some poppies in her garden, and I collected some of the seeds, so I'm not quite sure what color these are or what variety they are. And some more poppies that I collected. I don't know what kind they are, so that will be fun to find out. Some California poppies that are orange that I collected a few years ago. Spring Melody Blend, it's a type of California poppy. Amazing Gray corn poppy. American Legion corn poppy. The Venus poppy. Look how pretty that one is. The Hungarian blue poppy. My friend Linda has these and they're so pretty. It's a lettuce leaf poppy. These seeds are very old, so I'm not even sure if they will germinate, but it's worth a try. They are the Peony Flowered Oasis poppy. So these are perennial here where I live, and they are the Oriental poppies. I have a red one, but then I have one that's mixed color. So it'll be fun to see if these come up and if they perennialize for me. And then last but not least, these are Oriental poppy as well. They're either white or a light peach color that I collected from my friend Linda's home. This is a water jug, so I didn't have to clean it out. But if it was a different container like milk or orange juice, you definitely want to make sure you're using a clean container. I like to use about 4 inches of soil, so you can see I'll be making the cut right around here, which is near the base of where my hinge is for my mini greenhouse. I'm just using these metal cutting shears. You can use scissors or anything else that's sharp. I'm being careful not to cut all the way around because I will be using this part here to open and close my greenhouse. Just like this. On those cold days, the greenhouse stays closed, and on the hot days, I open it right up so the seedlings don't fry. I threw away the cap so that snow or rain can get into the hole here. Also, it makes it easier for me to water just inside of this little area. Even though it's optional, I do like to add additional holes in the top. I'm going to add holes in the bottom, and that's to make sure that water doesn't get logged in my container. I want to be able to have water drain out, and also if I want to bottom water this whole container, I can always do that by placing this in a larger pan full of water. I'd rather have more holes than less in my container. I'm not adding additional holes in the center here. You can do that if you want to. I've found that just adding them on the outside of this container because it's small enough is sufficient. Next, I'm going to add potting mix to my container. I'm just pressing down on the potting mix. I want to make sure I eliminate any sort of air gaps, but I don't want to press down too hard either. Together, we're going to plant this variety of poppy seeds. And you can see how tiny those seeds are. And I'm just sprinkling them. There's going to be a lot of plants in here, but remember, the goal is that we will be taking out chunks of the soil with the plants, and some of them may not survive, but we do want to have at least a good amount of our plants to survive as we move them. And the seeds are a dark color. That's why you're not noticing them or you're not able to see them, but they're on here. We want to make sure we have good contact between the seeds and the potting mix. So I'm pressing down. I like using garden markers better than Sharpies. I feel that they don't wipe off as much out in the rain or the snow. And I like to put a label on the inside of my container, just in case for whatever reason the label on the outside does get worn off. I have a backup with a label on the inside. I'm just going to use this small hand water pump sprayer. It works out really great for moistening the seeds. And whenever you add the water, you don't want it to be a heavy spray because you don't want to dislodge your seeds. So I'm misting it very lightly. Now when I bring this milk jug outside, it's going to freeze because it's very cold here where I live. So I won't need to add water to this jug for a number of months. We also have a lot of rain coming in the next few days. So if you live somewhere where it's a lot drier, you may need to water more often than I do. Before I duct tape, I am going to wipe the outside of my container because it did get a little wet. And I want the duct tape to be sticky. I'm going to seal my container with the duct tape. I don't like to use duct tape all the way around my container. I feel like that's a waste. And I've found that just by using a few pieces on the outside of my container is enough to hold it closed. I am going to make sure I'm pressing down on the duct tape though, because I want to make sure that it's sticking nicely. And I'm going to label on the outside just so I know what's in here. I like to label the tape and not the container so I can reuse the container for a few years. It's optional, you don't need to label it on all sides, but I like to do that when I can. And that's it. I'm going to do the same process with all my other poppy seeds. I really hope you enjoyed this video, and I will definitely be giving you updates on how the poppies are looking come springtime as soon as they start germinating. And I'll also bring you along with my process for basically taking out each hunk of seedlings from the milk jug and placing them in my landscape. And then once they start blooming in the landscape, I can't wait to give you a tour of how they look like. I know a lot of people that watch my videos read the comments, so I'd love to hear from you. Let me know how you've done with poppies. Have you had success or has it been hard for you? And let me know also if you've had success, how did you do it? What were some of your secrets? I'm looking forward to making a lot more videos on the winter sowing process. And until the next video, make it a great day with gardening.